The sea keeps its secrets. It's an old saying, and it feels true when you think about the Flannan Isles. A tiny collection of rocks in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. They're empty, for windswept. A place for birds and little else. Except for the lighthouse. For a time, men lived there too. Until they didn't. In December 1900, 3 men vanished from the lighthouse on Isle Moor, the main island. Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, Donald MacArthur. They disappeared without a trace. The mystery has lasted for over a century. People have offered all sorts of explanations. A ghost, a sea serpent, a giant wave. And then there's the other idea, the darker one. The one that says the sea had nothing to do with it. The one that says the monster wasn't in the water. It was on the rock. Could a killer have been at work on Flannan Isle? Could one of the men have snapped? Or could someone or something have come for them? This is the murder on the rock theory. It's a theory that pulls the mystery out of the realm of natural disaster and into the much more chilling world of human violence. To understand it, you first have to understand what happened, or rather, what was found. The lighthouse was a vital post. It guided ships through treacherous waters. It was run by a team of 4 keepers who worked in rotation. 3 were on the island, and 1 was on shore leave. In December 1900, James Ducat was the principal keeper. Thomas Marshall was the second assistant. And Donald MacArthur was the occasional keeper, filling in for the man on leave. The man on shore was Joseph Moore. The trouble started around December 15th. Passing ships noted the light was out. This was a serious problem, but the weather was awful. Storms raged across the Atlantic, making any trip to the island impossible. The relief vessel, the Hesperus, was scheduled to go out on the 20th, but the weather delayed it. Finally, on Boxing Day, December 26th, Captain James Harvey managed to get the Hesperus to the island. The approach was eerie. The island was silent. The usual flagpole was bare. No one came down to the landing to greet them. This was not normal procedure. The keepers were supposed to have the supply boxes ready and waiting. Harvey blew the ship's whistle and fired a flare. Nothing. No response. A deep sense of unease settled over the crew. Joseph Moore, the keeper who was supposed to be relieving the men, was sent ashore in a small boat. The dread he must have felt is hard to imagine. He climbed the steep steps carved into the rock. He reached the lighthouse entrance. The door was unlocked. He stepped inside. The place was empty. A strange, still life scene greeted him. In the kitchen, a meal of meat, pickles, and potatoes sat untouched on the table. A chair was knocked over, as if someone had jumped up from the table in a hurry. The clock on the wall had stopped. The beds were unmade, and in the entrance hall 2 sets of oilskins and boots were missing. One set, belonging to Donald MacArthur, was still hanging on its peg. Moore searched the rest of the lighthouse. It was tidy. The lamps had been cleaned and refilled with oil, ready for the next lighting. Everything was in order, except for the men themselves. They were gone. He went back outside and searched the small island. He found no sign of them. He returned to the ship, his face pale. He could only tell them, "Captain, they're gone!" Captain Harvey then went ashore himself. He saw the same scene. He and Moore noticed something else at the west landing. There, the damage was severe. A supply box had been smashed, its contents strewn about. Iron railings were bent and twisted. A rope lay coiled on the rocks. It looked like a powerful force had smashed into the island. Harvey sent a telegram back to the mainland. It read, "A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane." That became the official story. A massive, unexpected wave. A freak of nature. The theory goes that around dinner time, maybe Marshall and Ducat saw something wrong with the crane or the ropes at the west landing. They rushed out to secure it. MacArthur, perhaps hearing their shouts, ran out after them without even stopping to grab his coat. Then a colossal wave, one of those rogue waves that sailors whisper about, crashed over the island. It would have been hundreds of feet high, a wall of water moving with incredible force. It would have swept all 3 men into the churning sea in an instant. They would have had no chance. This explanation makes a lot of sense. The North Atlantic is a violent place. The damage to the west landing, which was over 100 feet above sea level, attests to the power of the ocean. It's the most logical, rational explanation, and yet it doesn't quite satisfy. It leaves too many nagging questions. Why was the kitchen door closed but unlocked? Why would experienced lighthouse keepers, men who knew the sea better than anyone, run out into a storm? And the biggest question of all, why would one of them, Donald MacArthur, run out into a winter storm in the North Atlantic without his heavy oilskins? Well, it would be suicide. It just doesn't fit the profile of a seasoned seaman. These holes are where the murder theory takes root. It discards the idea of a natural accident and replaces it with a human one. The theory splits into a few different versions, but they all center on one core idea: one or more of the men did not leave the lighthouse alive by their own choice. Let's look at the men themselves. We have to, if we're going to talk about murder. James Ducat was the senior man on the island, the principal keeper. He was in his 40s, a married man with a family. He was known as a steady, experienced keeper. Thomas Marshall was the second in command. He was in his late 20s. Then there was Donald MacArthur. He was the wild card. He was an occasional keeper, meaning he wasn't a permanent part of the crew. He was filling in. And he had a reputation. He was known as a tough man, a brawler, quick to anger. He was a former soldier. He was the kind of man who might get into a fight. The isolation of a lighthouse is hard to comprehend. 3 men trapped on a tiny rock, surrounded by a raging sea, for weeks on end. The psychological pressure is immense. The same faces, the same conversations, the same 4 walls. It's a pressure cooker. Small annoyances can grow into major grievances. A simmering resentment can boil over into rage. This is the setting for the first version of the murder theory: a fight among the keepers. Imagine the scene. The storm has been hammering the island for days. The men are on edge. Maybe MacArthur and Marshall have an old argument that resurfaces, or maybe it's something new. A debt, an insult, a perceived slight. In the close confines of the kitchen, words are exchanged. The argument escalates. The chair gets knocked over in the ensuing scuffle. In this scenario, MacArthur, with his reputation for a temper, snaps. He attacks Marshall. Ducat, the senior keeper, tries to intervene. It goes horribly wrong. Perhaps MacArthur kills both of them in a fit of rage. He's left on the island, in a silent lighthouse, with 2 bodies. The reality of what he's done crashes down on him. The guilt, the panic, the horror. He can't stay there. He can't face what he's done. So he walks out of the lighthouse, down to the cliffs, and throws himself into the sea. This version explains a few things the rogue wave theory can't. It explains the overturned chair as a sign of a struggle, not a hasty departure. It explains why MacArthur's oilskins were left behind. The fight happened inside. He didn't need them. His final walk to the cliff was one of despair, not a work-related emergency. The untouched meal suggests the violence erupted suddenly, interrupting their daily routine. But this theory also has huge problems. The biggest one is the lack of evidence. When the lighthouse was inspected by Robert Muirhead, the superintendent of the Northern Lighthouse Board, he found no signs of violence. No bloodstains, no broken furniture, other than the one chair, no weapons. A violent struggle to the death between 3 strong men would have left a mark. It's hard to believe MacArthur could have killed 2 men, cleaned up the entire scene perfectly, and then disposed of their bodies with no one ever finding a trace. And how do you dispose of 2 bodies on a tiny, barren island? The ground is rock. You can't bury them. The only option is the sea. But that means carrying 2 dead men down treacherous, slippery steps in the middle of a storm and heaving them into the water. It's a monumental task, and it still doesn't guarantee they would never be found. The currents around the Hebrides are strong, but bodies do wash ashore. None ever did. So maybe it didn't happen that way. Maybe the violence was more contained. What if one man killed another, and the 3rd man helped him cover it up, only for them both to be washed away later by a real wave? It gets complicated quickly. The more you twist the story to fit the evidence, the less plausible it becomes. This leads to the second, more outlandish version of the murder theory. This one proposes an outside attacker, a 4th person. The idea is that someone else came to the island, a killer who arrived by boat, murdered the 3 keepers, and then left. This sounds like something from a novel, but people have seriously considered it. Who would do such a thing, and why? Lighthouse keepers weren't rich. There was nothing of value to steal. The motive would have to be something else. Revenge. A madman on the loose. Perhaps a fugitive trying to hide out who killed the keepers to ensure their silence. The logistics of this are a nightmare. Alion Moor is incredibly remote. Getting there in a small boat during a winter storm would be nearly impossible. The landings are notoriously difficult even in good weather. A stranger wouldn't know how to navigate them. And for what purpose? To commit a pointless triple murder on a desolate rock. Some have tried to connect the disappearances to foreign agents. Spies, maybe, trying to disrupt British shipping. But this was 1900. The Great Wars were years away. Espionage of this kind seems highly unlikely. Others have suggested pirates or smugglers, but again, the motive is weak. What would they gain from killing 3 lighthouse keepers? It would only bring the authorities down on them. This version of the theory, the external killer, is compelling because it provides a neat, if horrifying, solution. It explains why there were no bodies. The killer took them away, or disposed of them more effectively than a panic keeper could. It could even explain the lack of a struggle inside. Perhaps the men were lured out one by one and killed on the cliffs. But there is zero evidence to support it. No signs of a fourth person, no unexplained boat sightings in the area. It's pure speculation, born from the desire for an answer, any answer, that isn't just, the sea did it. The idea of a serial killer hopping from one remote island to another is a modern horror trope, not a historical reality for the Outer Hebrides in 1900. The sheer improbability makes it almost impossible to take seriously. The murder theory in either form is fueled by a few key pieces of evidence that have become part of the Flannan Isles legend. The most famous of these is the lighthouse logbook. The popular story says that the logbook contains strange, chilling entries for the days leading up to the disappearance. One entry, supposedly from Thomas Marshall, described the storm. "Severe winds the like of which I have never seen before in 20 years, it read. He also noted that James Ducat had been very quiet and that Donald MacArthur had been crying. This last detail is particularly shocking. A tough man like MacArthur, a known brawler reduced to tears. What could cause that? Another entry supposedly read, "Storm is raging. We are in the middle of it. God is over all." These entries paint a picture of extreme psychological distress. The men weren't just battling a storm, they were battling their own fear and despair. MacArthur crying suggests a breakdown. Maybe he wasn't crying from fear of the storm, but from remorse over something he had done. Or maybe the isolation and the constant howling of the wind had finally broken him. These logbook entries are the strongest pillar supporting the murder theory. They suggest a human drama, a psychological collapse that makes a violent outcome seem plausible. The problem is, they're almost certainly fake. The official investigation by the Northern Lighthouse Board never mentioned these entries. The final report by Superintendent Muirhead quotes the logbook, but his version is much more mundane. The entries describe the weather. They note damage to the lighthouse. They are professional and routine. There is no mention of anyone crying, no mention of extreme emotional distress. The dramatic, spooky entries appear to be a later invention, a bit of folklore added to the story by a writer decades later. They made a good story even better, they gave it a psychological depth that was missing. But they are not historical fact. Without the crying man and the quiet man, the case for a psychologically fueled murder becomes much weaker. It puts us back to a simple fight, and the problems with that scenario remain. So, let's re-examine the clues through the lens of murder. The overturned chair, a struggle, or a man jumping up to respond to an emergency. It could be either. The untouched meal, an interrupted dinner, or a meal prepared for men who never came back to eat it. Again, it fits both theories. The one piece of evidence that remains stubbornly difficult to explain is MacArthur's coat. Why would he go outside without it? The murder theory provides a simple answer: he was attacked inside, or he went to the cliffs in a suicidal state of mind. The rogue wave theory has to stretch to explain it. Proponents suggest he was the last to leave, running out in such a panic that he didn't even think about his coat. It's possible, but it feels unlikely for a man of his experience. Could there be another explanation? What if MacArthur wasn't feeling well? What if he was inside, sick, while the other two went out to deal with the emergency? They get swept away. He realizes they're gone. He's alone. He knows he can't run the lighthouse by himself. He knows he's trapped. The despair sets in. He walks out and takes his own life. This is a variation of the murder theory, a suicide theory. It explains the coat, but it's still pure speculation. There's no evidence to support it. This is the central problem with the murder theory. It's a theory built on absence. An absence of bodies, an absence of answers. An absence of a clear motive. To believe it, you have to fill in the gaps with your own imagination. You have to invent a fight, or a madman, or a secret spy. The official explanation, the rogue wave, is also built on an absence of witnesses, but it is supported by positive evidence. The damage to the West Landing was real. The power of the sea in that region is a known fact. Lighthouse keepers had been washed away by waves before. It was a known hazard of the job. Superintendent Muirhead, the man who knew the keepers and the lighthouses better than anyone, concluded it was a wave. He believed the men had gone down to the landing during a lull in the storm to secure their equipment. While their backs were to the ocean, a massive wave, far larger than the preceding ones, rose up and crashed down on them, carrying them away. It's a terrifying image. It's also impersonal. It lacks the human drama of a murder. In a murder, there is a villain and a victim. There is motive. There is a story. In a natural disaster, there is only chance. A random, meaningless event. And perhaps that is what is so unsettling about the Flannan Isles. The idea of a serial killer, a human monster, is frightening. But in a strange way, it's also comfort. It puts a human face on the tragedy. It suggests a world that, while dangerous, is ultimately understandable. People kill people for reasons, even if those reasons are twisted. We can understand rage. We can understand greed. We can't understand a mountain of water that appears from nowhere and erases 3 men from existence. The murder theory persists because it turns a mystery of nature into a human crime story. It gives us characters, the steady Ducat, the young Marshal, the volatile MacArthur. It gives us a plot, a fight, a betrayal, a moment of madness. It's a better story. But is it the true story? Probably not. The evidence just isn't there. There's no blood, no weapon, no motive that makes sense. The logistics of the crime, whether committed by an insider or an outsider, are staggering. Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one, points firmly towards the sea. The Flannan Isles disappearances are a perfect storm of strange facts and unanswered questions. The untouched meal, the stopped clock, the abandoned coat. These details are like puzzle pieces that don't quite fit together. The murder theory is an attempt to force them to fit. It smooths over the rough edges by inventing a killer. But maybe the pieces were never meant to fit perfectly. Maybe the truth is messy. Maybe it was just a series of unlikely events, an unusual storm, a moment of bad judgment from experienced men. A wave of unimaginable size, a 1 in a million occurrence. So, could a serial killer be responsible for the Flannan Isles disappearances? It's almost certainly a no. The idea of some sea-roaming murderer landing on Island Moor in a December storm to kill 3 men for no reason strains credulity to its breaking point. It's a theory born of fiction, not fact. Could one of the keepers have been responsible? Could it have been a murder-suicide? This is more plausible than the external killer theory, but it is still deeply flawed. The lack of any forensic evidence of a struggle makes it incredibly unlikely. It remains a ghost of a possibility, a dark whisper against the roar of the ocean. The enduring power of the murder theory isn't about evidence, it's about psychology. We are storytelling creatures. We look for patterns. We look for reasons. The thought of a random, powerful, and indifferent force of nature simply wiping people away is deeply disturbing to our sense of order. A murder, as horrific as it is, feels less random. It feels like it belongs to our world, the human world. A rogue wave belongs to another world, a world of chaos that we can't control or understand. The mystery of the Flannan Isles isn't just about what happened to 3 men. It's about the stories we tell to make sense of the void they left behind. The ghost stories, the tales of sea monsters, and the theory of murder on the rock. They are all attempts to fill the silence that fell over that island in December 1900. A silence that, in the end, was most likely caused by the simple, terrible, and final power of the sea. The sea keeps its secrets, and this is one it will probably never give up.